They called him weak, but when Rocky Balboa stepped into the ring, everything Philadelphia thought they knew about strength was about to be shattered. What happens when a nobody from the streets faces a champion who's never tasted defeat? Drop A if you think the underdog can surprise everyone, and stick around because this story will change how you see victory forever. They called him weak, but when Rocky Balboa stepped into the ring that December night in Philadelphia, the whole world was watching a man they thought was nothing more than a street bum with delusions of grandeur. The newspapers had been brutal for weeks leading up to this moment. "Local bum gets lucky break," read the Philadelphia Inquirer. Apollo Creed's Christmas gift to charity case mocked the Daily News. Even the bookmakers in South Philly refused to take bets on Rocky, calling it legal robbery to offer odds on such a mismatch. Rocky Balboa, 30 years old, had spent most of his adult life collecting debts for a loan shark named Tony Gazzo, his massive hands more familiar with breaking kneecaps than breaking records. His apartment in South Philadelphia was a testament to a life of barely getting by, peeling wallpaper, a refrigerator that hummed like a dying animal, and windows so dirty they barely let in the grey winter light. His neighbors knew him as the gentle giant who fed stray cats and never raised his voice, even when the local kids threw rocks at his windows. But Apollo Creed, the heavyweight champion of the world, saw something else when he looked at Rocky's name on that list of available fighters. Creed was everything Rocky wasn't: polished, educated, wealthy beyond imagination, and undefeated in 37 professional fights. When Creed's original opponent pulled out with an injury just weeks before the biggest fight of the year, he didn't want another established contender. He wanted a show, a spectacle, an easy payday that would entertain the masses while padding his already enormous bank account. "I want to give a local Philadelphia boy a shot at the title," Creed announced at the press conference, his gold teeth gleaming under the camera lights. "It's Christmas time, and what better gift could I give this city than a fairy tale?" The reporters laughed, the promoters counted their money, and somewhere in South Philadelphia, Rocky Balboa was punching sides of beef in Mickey's gym, unaware that his life was about to change forever. The night they offered Rocky the fight, he was sitting in his apartment, eating a dinner of canned pasta and stale bread, when the phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to a promoter who spoke so fast, Rocky could barely understand him. "We're offering you the shot of a lifetime, kid. Apollo Creed wants to fight you for the heavyweight championship of the world. It's $150,000, win or lose." Rocky dropped the phone and stared at the wall for 10 minutes before calling the number back to make sure he hadn't imagined the whole conversation. Apollo Creed stood in his penthouse training facility overlooking the Los Angeles skyline, his body a masterpiece of athletic perfection carved from years of dedication and the finest trainers money could buy. Every muscle was precisely defined, every movement calculated for maximum efficiency and devastating impact. He shadowboxed in front of floor-to-ceiling mirrors, his combinations flowing like deadly poetry, each punch thrown with the confidence of a man who had never known defeat. The champion's entourage filled the luxurious space. Managers in $1,000 suits, trainers with Olympic credentials, nutritionists who monitored every calorie that entered Creed's body. They spoke in hushed, reverent tones about their fighter's supremacy, analyzing footage of his previous victories, frame by frame, marveling at the technical precision that had demolished every challenger who dared step into the ring with him. "The Italian stallion," Creed laughed as he watched grainy footage of Rocky's few professional fights on a massive television screen. "Look at this guy, throwing punches like he's swatting flies. No technique, no science, just brute force and luck." His trainer, Duke, nodded in agreement, though something in the older man's eyes suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by what he saw on that screen. Creed's mansion in Beverly Hills was a monument to his success, Olympic medals displayed in custom glass cases, championship belts arranged like royal crowns, photographs of him with presidents and movie stars covering entire walls. His garage housed a collection of cars worth more than most people would earn in several lifetimes. Everything in Apollo Creed's world reinforced the same message. He was untouchable, unbeatable, and destined to remain champion for as long as he chose to fight. The press conferences became Creed's personal stage for psychological warfare. He arrived in custom suits that cost more than Rocky's annual rent, spoke with the polished confidence of someone who had been groomed for greatness since childhood, and treated questions about his opponent like jokes that weren't particularly funny. "I respect what this young man is trying to do," he would say with a patronizing smile. "But let's be realistic. This is a business, and business is about to be very, very good." Behind the bravado, Apollo Creed had begun training with an intensity that surprised even his closest advisors. 6 hours a day in the gym, sparring sessions against multiple opponents, studying not just Rocky's fights, but every piece of available footage from his amateur days. When Duke asked why he was preparing so seriously for what everyone considered a guaranteed victory, Creed's answer revealed the calculating mind that had carried him to the championship. "You don't stay on top by taking anyone lightly, old man, not even a bum from Philadelphia." Mickey Goldmill shuffled through the shadows of his South Philadelphia boxing gym like a ghost haunting the ruins of better days. At 76 years old, his weathered hands bore the scars of 1,000 training sessions, his voice reduced to a gravelly whisper from decades of shouting instructions over the sound of speed bags and heavy bags being pummeled by dreamers who thought they could fight their way out of poverty. The gym smelled of sweat, leather, and broken dreams. Faded photographs of forgotten fighters lined the walls, their faces staring down at a new generation of young men who believed they had what it took to make it to the top. Mickey had trained 3 champions in his prime, but that was before arthritis claimed his hands and before the sport moved away from neighborhood gyms toward corporate training facilities with million-dollar equipment and scientific approaches to conditioning. When Mickey first saw Rocky Balboa walk into his gym 5 years earlier, he saw just another neighborhood tough guy looking for a place to work out his aggression. Rocky's technique was crude, his footwork sloppy, his understanding of boxing strategy practically non-existent. But there was something else, something Mickey recognized from his decades of watching fighters come and go, an unbreakable spirit that couldn't be taught or purchased. "You got heart, kid, but heart don't mean nothing if you don't got the tools," Mickey had told Rocky after watching him spar for the first time. The old trainer took the young fighter under his wing, not because he believed Rocky would ever amount to much, but because he saw in him the same hunger that had driven Mickey himself into the ring 60 years earlier, when boxing was the only way out of the tenements for kids with more dreams than prospects. Now, as Mickey watched Rocky prepare for the biggest fight in boxing history, he felt the weight of every lesson he had ever learned, every mistake he had ever made, every fighter he had seen destroyed by overconfidence or undone by fear. This wasn't just about Rocky anymore. This was about proving that the old ways still mattered, that heart and determination could still triumph over money and privilege. The training sessions became Mickey's last great masterpiece. He pushed Rocky beyond every limit the younger man thought he had, forcing him to run the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art at dawn, teaching him combinations that would maximize his natural power while minimizing his technical weaknesses. "You ain't gonna outbox this guy," Mickey wheezed during one particularly brutal session, "but you might just outfight him if you listen to everything I'm telling you and forget everything you think you know about being tough." Adrian Panino worked behind the counter of J&M Tropical Fish, her sanctuary from a world that had never quite known what to make of her quiet intensity and sharp intelligence. At 28, she had resigned herself to a life of watching other people pursue their dreams while she remained safely invisible. surrounded by the gentle bubbling of aquarium filters and the peaceful movements of exotic fish from distant oceans. Her brother Paulie worked at the meatpacking plant and spent most of his evenings drunk, alternately complaining about his dead-end job and berating Adrian for what he called her spinster attitude toward life. Their small apartment above the pet shop had become a battlefield of whispered arguments and long silences, with Adrian absorbing his bitterness while trying to maintain her own fragile sense of hope. When Rocky first walked into the pet shop, Adrian barely looked up from the fish food she was measuring. He came in every week, always buying turtle food for his pets Cuff and Link, always trying to make conversation with the shy woman who seemed to understand the loneliness that shadowed his eyes. Their early conversations were awkward, filled with long pauses and nervous laughter. But gradually, Adrian began to recognize something in Rocky that she had never encountered before. Genuine kindness, without any expectation of reward. The night Rocky asked her to go for a walk, Adrian's hands shook as she locked up the store. They wandered through the empty streets of South Philadelphia, past the row houses where both of them had grown up, talking about dreams that seemed too big for their small lives. Rocky spoke about fighting not for money or fame, but to prove to himself that he wasn't just another neighborhood tough guy destined for obscurity. Adrian found herself sharing thoughts she had never spoken aloud, about feeling invisible in a world that seemed to have no place for quiet people who preferred books to bars and fish to crowds. As Rocky's training intensified, Adrian became his refuge from the mounting pressure and media attention. She would meet him after his runs, bringing coffee and encouragement when the whole world seemed convinced he was about to be humiliated on national television. Their relationship deepened not through grand romantic gestures, but through small moments of understanding. Her hand on his shoulder after a particularly brutal training session, his gentle encouragement when she found the courage to speak up at the pet shop. The night before the fight, Adrian visited Rocky at his apartment and found him staring out the window at the Philadelphia skyline. "I can't win," he told her quietly. "I know I can't win. But if I can go the distance, if I can still be standing when that final bell rings, then I'll know I'm not just another bum from the neighborhood." Adrian took his scarred hands in hers and realized that sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your opponent, it's refusing to be defeated by your own limitations. The transformation began at 4:30 every morning when Rocky's alarm clock shattered the silence of his cramped apartment like a gunshot in a cathedral. While the rest of Philadelphia slept, he would pull on his gray sweatsuit and battered running shoes, step into the pre-dawn darkness, and begin the ritual that would either prepare him for greatness or expose him as the fraud his critics claimed he was. Mickey's training regimen was a masterclass in old-school boxing preparation, every exercise designed to forge not just physical strength, but the kind of mental toughness that separated champions from pretenders. The gym became Rocky's second home, its worn wooden floors and cracked mirrors witnessing a metamorphosis that few people outside those walls believed possible. Speed bag sessions that started clumsy and arrhythmic gradually developed into hypnotic percussion symphonies. Heavy bag work evolved from wild swinging to precise, devastating combinations that made the canvas sway like a ship in a storm. But it was the running that became legendary in the neighborhoods of South Philadelphia. Every morning, Rocky would pound through the empty streets, past the shuttered storefronts and sleeping row houses, his breath forming clouds in the bitter December air. The route always ended the same way, a sprint up the 72 steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Each step a small victory over the voices in his head that whispered he wasn't good enough, smart enough, or strong enough to belong in the same ring as Apollo Creed. The local kids began following him on their bicycles, shouting encouragement as he ran past their schools and playgrounds. Shopkeepers would wave from their doorways, and even the police officers on the early shift would nod with respect as the neighborhood's unlikely hero jogged past their patrol cars. Rocky Balboa was becoming more than just a fighter preparing for a bout. He was becoming a symbol of hope for everyone who had ever been counted out before they even had a chance to prove themselves. Mickey pushed him beyond every boundary he thought existed. Sparring sessions against fighters who were faster, more technical, and more experienced taught Rocky that survival in the ring required more than just the ability to absorb punishment. He learned to slip punches by millimeters, to create angles that maximized his power while minimizing his exposure to counters, to think 3 moves ahead even when his body was screaming for rest. The real breakthrough came during a sparring session 6 weeks before the fight, when Rocky caught his opponent, a seasoned professional with twice as many wins, with a combination that dropped him to the canvas like a demolished building. The gym fell silent. Mickey's eyes widened with a mixture of surprise and pride. For the first time since this whole impossible journey began, everyone in that room realized they might be witnessing something special, something that couldn't be measured in statistics or explained by conventional wisdom about how boxing matches were supposed to unfold. The media circus surrounding the fight transformed Philadelphia into a carnival of speculation and skepticism. Sports reporters from every major network descended on the city like vultures, their cameras and microphones invading every corner of Rocky's suddenly public life. They filmed him training at Mickey's gym, eating breakfast at the local diner, even feeding his turtles in his modest apartment, all while maintaining the narrative that this was nothing more than an elaborate publicity stunt designed to separate gullible fight fans from their hard-earned money. Howard Cosell, the most famous sports broadcaster in America, arrived with his ABC television crew to document what he openly called the most mismatched championship fight in modern boxing history. His interviews with Rocky became exercises in condescension disguised as journalism, each question designed to highlight the vast gulf between the polished champion and the rough-hewn challenger who struggled to articulate his thoughts in the formal language expected of professional athletes. But something unexpected began happening in the streets of Philadelphia. Working-class people who had never cared about boxing found themselves invested in Rocky's story. Factory workers adjusted their shifts to catch glimpses of his training runs. Housewives who had never thrown a punch in their lives began discussing boxing technique at neighborhood grocery stores. Children drew pictures of Rocky in their school notebooks, transforming him into a folk hero before the fight had even taken place. The contrast couldn't have been more stark when Apollo Creed held his press conferences at the luxurious Bellevue Hotel downtown. Surrounded by marble columns and crystal chandeliers, Creed spoke eloquently about his place in boxing history, his plans for retirement, and his confidence that this fight would be nothing more than a profitable exhibition. He wore suits that cost more than Rocky's annual income, and spoke with the casual arrogance of someone who had never doubted his own superiority. Meanwhile, Rocky continued his simple routine, training at Mickey's gym, running through the neighborhoods where he had grown up, spending quiet evenings with Adrian as she helped him deal with the overwhelming attention. When reporters asked him about his strategy for fighting Creed, Rocky's answers were refreshingly honest. "I'm going to try to hit him harder than he hits me." The simplicity of his approach became part of his appeal, a stark contrast to the complex psychological games and technical analyses that usually surrounded championship fights. The betting lines reflected the general consensus. Apollo Creed was favored by odds so overwhelming that most bookmakers stopped taking action on the fight altogether. Professional fighters, former champions, and boxing analysts unanimously predicted that Rocky would be lucky to survive 3 rounds against the champion's superior speed, power, and technique. But in the neighborhoods of South Philadelphia, something else was building, a belief that sometimes the impossible becomes inevitable when someone refuses to accept that they don't belong. Mickey Goldmill had seen enough fighters in his 7 decades around boxing to recognize the difference between manufactured confidence and genuine readiness. As Rocky's preparation entered its final phase, The old trainer noticed something he had never seen before in all his years of preparing fighters for big moments. His student was developing the kind of quiet certainty that separated champions from everyone else who stepped into the ring. The gym sessions became increasingly intense, with Mickey designing specific drills to prepare Rocky for Apollo Creed's fighting style. They studied film footage of the champion's previous fights, noting his tendency to circle counterclockwise, his preference for left hooks to the body, and his habit of dropping his right hand slightly after throwing jabs. Mickey knew that Rocky would never match Creed's technical sophistication, but he believed he could exploit small weaknesses that other fighters had been too intimidated to pursue. "This guy thinks he's fighting another stiff," Mickey wheezed during one late-night strategy session. "He's going to come out looking to end it quick, make it look easy for the cameras. But if you can weather that first storm, if you can make him work harder than he expects, then maybe, just maybe, you can turn this into the kind of fight where anything can happen." Adrian became Rocky's source of emotional strength during the most difficult weeks of preparation. While the rest of the world questioned his sanity for accepting this fight, she never wavered in her belief that he belonged in that ring. Her quiet confidence meant more to him than all the newspaper articles and television interviews combined. She understood that this fight wasn't really about winning or losing. It was about Rocky proving to himself that he could stand with the best fighter in the world and not be found wanting. The final weeks of training pushed Rocky's body to limits he hadn't known existed. His hands, already scarred from years of street fights and debt collection, became weapons capable of generating devastating power from angles that defied conventional boxing wisdom. His conditioning reached levels that amazed even Mickey, who had trained champions and knew what it took to compete at the highest levels of professional boxing. The sparring sessions became legendary in Philadelphia's underground boxing community. Word spread through the gyms and fight clubs that something special was happening at Mickey's place. That the local guy who was supposed to be lamb, led to slaughter, was hitting harder and moving better than anyone had imagined possible. Seasoned fighters who came to spar with Rocky left with new respect for his preparation, and more importantly, for his refusal to be intimidated by the magnitude of what lay ahead. As fight night approached, Rocky developed a ritual that centered him amid the chaos of media attention and public speculation. Every evening, he would walk through the neighborhoods where he had grown up, stopping to talk with people he had known his entire life. The shop owners who had extended him credit when times were tough, the kids who looked up to him as proof that someone from their streets could make it to the biggest stage in sports, the elderly residents who remembered his father and saw in Rocky the best qualities of a generation that believed hard work could overcome any obstacle. The Spectrum Arena in Philadelphia had never hosted an event of this magnitude. On the night of December 31st, 15,000 people packed into every available seat, their collective energy creating an atmosphere that crackled with anticipation and nervous excitement. The crowd was unlike anything typically seen at championship fights. Working-class families who had saved for months to afford tickets, local business owners who had closed their shops early to witness history, and long-time boxing fans who sensed they were about to see something that would be remembered long after the final bell. Apollo Creed's entrance was a masterpiece of theatrical intimidation designed to overwhelm his opponent before the first punch was thrown. He emerged from the tunnel wearing a Stars and Stripes cape and accompanied by a full marching band playing "Living in America" at deafening volume. Dancers in elaborate costumes preceded him down the aisle, and the lighting effects transformed the arena into something resembling a Las Vegas nightclub more than a boxing venue. The champion moved through this spectacle with the confidence of a man who had orchestrated hundreds of similar entrances, each gesture calculated to reinforce his image as an untouchable superstar. He shadowboxed for the cameras, posed with celebrities in the front rows, and soaked in the adulation of fans who had paid premium prices to witness what they expected would be a dominant performance by their hero. When Apollo Creed finally climbed through the ropes and stood in the center of the ring, his physical presence was overwhelming. Standing 6 feet 1 inch and weighing exactly 210 pounds, every muscle in his body seemed designed for the specific purpose of destroying anyone foolish enough to challenge his supremacy. His movements were fluid and precise, his confidence so complete that he appeared to be enjoying himself even before the fight began. The crowd's energy shifted noticeably when Rocky's music began playing, a simple, driving theme that seemed to emerge from the blue-collar heartbeat of Philadelphia itself. No elaborate costumes, no choreographed dancers, no theatrical lighting effects. Just Rocky Balboa, wearing simple black trunks and a look of determined concentration that suggested he understood exactly what he was walking into and had made peace with whatever was about to happen. As Rocky climbed through the ropes, the contrast between the two fighters became starkly apparent. Where Creed was polished and spectacular, Rocky was raw and authentic. Where the champion commanded attention through calculated charisma, the challenger earned respect through obvious sincerity. The 15,000 people in attendance suddenly realized they weren't just watching a boxing match. They were witnessing a collision between two completely different philosophies about what it meant to be a fighter. The referee's instructions seemed to last forever, both fighters nodding as he explained the rules they had followed their entire careers. But when they touched gloves at the center of the ring, something passed between them that the cameras couldn't capture and the commentators couldn't explain. A mutual recognition that they were about to test themselves in ways that would reveal who they really were when everything else was stripped away. The opening bell unleashed a fury that caught even the most experienced boxing observers off guard. Apollo Creed came out with the aggressive confidence of a champion, determined to end the fight quickly and decisively, his combinations flowing with the kind of technical precision that had made him the most feared heavyweight in the world. His left jab snapped out like a piston, setting up devastating right hands and hooks that had dropped more accomplished fighters than Rocky Balboa. But something was wrong. The punches that should have ended the fight in the first round were landing on a target that refused to go down. Rocky absorbed Creed's early assault with the kind of defensive instincts that Mickey had drilled into him during those brutal training sessions, slipping some punches, blocking others, and accepting the ones he couldn't avoid while constantly moving forward, always pressing the action, never allowing the champion to establish the kind of distance that made his superior boxing skills most effective. By the end of the third round, Apollo Creed's expression had changed from confident amusement to genuine concern. The local tough guy who was supposed to fold under pressure was not only still standing, but actually beginning to find his rhythm, landing heavy shots to the champion's body that were clearly taking their toll. Creed's corner was unusually animated between rounds, his trainers shouting instructions about staying disciplined and not getting drawn into the kind of close-quarters brawl where Rocky's size and strength advantages could neutralize the champion's technical superiority. The middle rounds became a revelation for everyone watching. Rocky's awkward style, which had looked so crude on film, proved to be perfectly suited for disrupting Apollo Creed's textbook technique. Where other fighters had tried to match the champion's speed and precision, Rocky simply overwhelmed him with constant pressure and unorthodox angles that made it impossible for Creed to establish any kind of comfortable fighting rhythm. The crowd, which had started the evening expecting to witness a one-sided beating, found itself on its feet as Rocky not only survived, but began to take control of significant portions of the fight. His left hook, which Mickey had refined during countless hours of technical work, began finding its mark with increasing frequency, snapping Creed's head back and opening a cut above the champion's left eye that grew larger and more dangerous with each passing round. What made Rocky's performance even more remarkable was his apparent immunity to the psychological warfare that had broken so many previous challenges. Apollo Creed's trash talk and intimidation tactics seemed to bounce off the Philadelphia fighter like raindrops off a window. Instead of being overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment, Rocky appeared to be gaining confidence with each round, his punches becoming sharper and more precise as he realized that the heavyweight champion of the world was just another man who bled when hit hard enough. The final rounds transformed the Spectrum Arena into a cauldron of noise and emotion that threatened to lift the roof off the building. What had begun as a showcase for Apollo Creed's dominance had evolved into something nobody had anticipated, a genuine fight between two warriors who had discovered reserves of courage and determination that surprised even themselves. Apollo Creed, his face marked by cuts and swelling that told the story of a much harder night than anyone had predicted, reached deep into the champion's heart that had carried him through 37 previous victories. His punches carried the desperation of a man who realized his reputation, his legacy, and his sense of himself as an unstoppable force were all under assault from someone who wasn't supposed to belong in the same ring. Rocky Balboa, blood streaming from wounds above both eyes, his body absorbing punishment that would have stopped most fighters hours earlier, continued to move forward with the relentless determination of a man who had finally found his purpose in life. Every punch he threw carried the weight of every doubt that had ever been expressed about his abilities, every insult that had ever been directed at his intelligence, every moment when he had wondered if he was destined to remain invisible forever. The 15th and final round became a testament to human endurance that transcended sports and entered the realm of pure drama. Both fighters, exhausted beyond the point where technique mattered, relied entirely on willpower and the kind of courage that emerges only when everything else has been stripped away. They stood in the center of the ring, trading punches with the mechanical determination of men who had forgotten everything, except the need to prove something fundamental about their own character. When the final bell rang, both fighters remained standing, but something had changed that couldn't be measured by scorecards or championship belts. Apollo Creed had won the fight on points, retaining his title and his undefeated record, but everyone in that arena understood that Rocky Balboa had achieved something more valuable than victory. He had earned the respect of a champion and proved that heart could overcome almost any disadvantage. As the fighters embraced in the center of the ring, their mutual respect evident to everyone watching, the crowd rose to its feet in recognition of what they had witnessed. This hadn't been just a boxing match. It had been a demonstration of the human capacity to exceed expectations, to find strength in places where weakness was assumed to exist, and to transform perceived limitations into sources of power that couldn't be taught or purchased. The newspapers the next morning would focus on Apollo Creed's narrow victory and successful title defense. But the real story was written in the faces of the 15,000 people who filed out of the Spectrum that night, knowing they had seen something that would stay with them forever. Rocky Balboa had lost the fight, but won something more important, the knowledge that he belonged exactly where he was, that his dreams weren't too big for his circumstances, and that sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to be defeated by other people's expectations of what you're capable of achieving. This is what happens when someone decides that other people's opinions about their limitations don't define their reality. Rocky didn't win the championship that night, but he won something infinitely more valuable. Proof that courage and determination can take you places that talent and privilege alone never could. If this story of the ultimate underdog moved you, drop a comment about your own moment when you decided to stop listening to the doubters. Don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this remind us that the most powerful victories happen when we refuse to accept other people's definitions of what's possible.